If it please, Chair, I would call Mr. Jess Harper, who is in the room, so we'll just do a quick swap over and press on.
All right, well, in that case, we shall stay where we are. Ms. Harper would be good enough to come forward. Or was it Mr. Harper?
Mr. Harper.
I'm sorry, Mr. Harper. Has Mr. Harper been sworn or affirmed, as the case may be? He has not. Mr. Harper, thank you very much for coming to the Commission. If you would be good enough to follow the instructions of my associate, who is seated opposite you, she will administer the affirmation to you.
I will read you the affirmation. At the end, please say yes or I do. Do you solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm that the evidence which you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Harper. I'll ask Ms. Dowsett now to ask you some questions.
Thank you. Mr. Harper, you are the CEO of Disability Intermediaries Australia, and you've held that role since November 2019.
Yes.
You are also a member of the NDIS Quality and Safeguard Commission's Industry Consultative Committee.
Yes.
And you are a member of the NDIA's Industry CEO Reference Group.
Yes.
And you are an executive committee member of the NDIA's Digital Community of Interest.
Correct.
But you're here speaking to us today in your capacity with Disability Intermediaries Australia.
Yes.
And I can call that DIA.
Yes.
You have prepared a statement for this Royal Commission.
Yes.
And there are two minor corrections to that statement.
That's correct.
Commissioners, this is in Bundle A at tab 21. The first correction is at paragraph 64. There is a remnant footnote number 6 that doesn't have any text. It should be omitted.
Correct.
And in paragraph 78, the cross-reference should be to paragraph 77.
That's correct.
With those two corrections, are the contents of the statement true and correct?
Yes, they are.
Thank you. So DIA is the peak body for plan management and support coordination providers and practitioners.
That's correct.
You have 900 provider members and 35,000 practitioners.
Yes.
And they deliver intermediary supports, so plan management or support coordination, to over 255 NDIS participants.
255,000 NDIS participants, yes.
Very briefly about plan management and support coordination, just for people who are not as familiar as you with those terms. A participant chooses how the funds in their plan are administered or managed. There are three options, and a participant can choose between the three or a combination of the three.
That's correct.
There is agency managed, and according to some NDIA statistics from the 2022-23 Quarter 1 report, 13% of all NDIS participants are agency managed.
That's correct.
Then there is self-managed and plan managed.
That's correct.
And self-managed and plan managed, people can choose a combination of those.
That's correct.
Plan managed, we have 57%.
That's correct.
And the balance are either partially or fully self-managed.
That's correct.
Plan management is financial administration, and that's funded separately to reasonable and necessary supports.
That's correct.
There's another component to it, which is capacity building, of supporting a participant to be able to manage their own plan in the future, and that's funded through reasonable and necessary supports.
Yes.
And so then plan managers, picking up on Ms. Lee's evidence before, plan managers need to be registered NDIS providers.
That's correct under the legislation.
Yes, and then support coordination.
Do not need to be registered. No.
So there are 3 levels of support coordination. You must be registered if you are delivering support coordination to a participant who is agency managed.
That is correct.
And you've spoken in your statement about the vital role of these intermediaries, plan managers and support coordination in terms of enabling choice and control for participants.
Yes.
If I could just ask you to stick with support coordination, can you just very briefly talk about how the process of the person providing support coordination enables choice and control?
Support coordinators across all three levels, by their function, are there to support a participant to be informed consumers and to understand and unpack their plan and what opportunities their NDIS plan or package is able to then be procured. They'll work with a participant to engage and connect with service providers, and ultimately are there to support a participant to, as much as possible, self-direct their service. So they're there to support a participant and to allow a participant to exercise their voice as much as possible.
So it's more than just providing a list of phone numbers of people who might do what you want.
Correct. It's working with the participant to understand their specific needs, requirements, preferences, and then working with that participant to find the most appropriate providers to deliver that support.
And DIA is doing some work on what I might refer to briefly as professionalising intermediary support. So you've developed professional standards of practice.
That's correct.
And you've provided copies of those to the Royal Commission.
I have.
And you're also working on an accreditation model.
That's correct.
And this work is done in consultation with service users, people with disability.
That's correct.
With your members.
That's correct.
And also with the NDIA and NDIS Commission.
That's correct.
I want to turn now to a specific topic that is addressed in both of the professional standards of practice, but I'll refer to it in the context of support coordination, and this is the issue of conflict of interest. And so the question that has arisen in a number of hearings in this Royal Commission, and one which you address in your statement, is the potential for, or the actual conflict of interest when a participant's support coordinator works for the same provider as from whom they get other services. So can you explain Disability Intermediaries Australia's view about that conflict of interest issue?
Absolutely. From a professionalisation perspective, and as you mentioned in our professional standards of practice, DIA takes a view that if you're going to operate as an intermediary, so be that plan management or support coordination, you shouldn't be able to be the same provider to the same participant for other supports and services. And the reason for that, and we've heard some very telling evidence throughout these hearings, and some themes around coercive control, power and influence. And what we have found prior to implementing our professional standards of practice was the number of organisations who are multifaceted, provide lots of different types of supports and services, using support coordination as a client capture mechanism. It's extremely difficult for a support coordinator to be able to question and challenge a provider's response to a particular type of service. So why does it have to be delivered that way? Or why can't I go to the beach? Or why can't I, as a participant, have a service the way that I would like? When you are an employee of the same organisation.
Can I just pause you there? Is it the support coordinator's role to be asking those questions?
It's the support coordinator's role to support the participant to ask those questions. And in cases where a participant might be non-verbal, then yes, they would be asking that on their behalf. It can also be supporting legal decision makers through that process as well.
Right. And you do allow in your document for an exception. So can you explain where you see a basis for an exception to?
Yes, there's a number of exceptions we have to that particular standard, and they're in circumstances where there's bespoke service settings where a more integrated service response might be appropriate. Some examples might be within particular Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander settings. There could be some within the cold community where there may only be a single provider available within that area to support a participant. But in those circumstances, what our professional standards of practice seek to do is say, On top of or that exception, that doesn't mean that it's a carte blanche. You need to be able to demonstrate a certain level of management of that conflict throughout that process, as opposed to a more free-flowing ability to be able to influence participants' choices.
From DIA's perspective, why is it not sufficient that if I'm a service provider and I've got a support coordinator and I offer a range of other services, and I explain to you, the participant, look, we do all these things, and if you with our service, our support coordinator, you don't have to use the rest of our services. You just need to understand that we're all related. Why is that not enough?
That's where we put it at our independence of service provisions at the participant level as opposed to an organisational level. Because for a participant to be taken through from a choice and control perspective when looking at what their service offering portfolio might look like and the supports that they might engage, there is inherent bias and challenges with that conflict that will exist if you as the support coordinator are recommending or supporting a participant to engage with your own organisation. There is likely to be a range of policy, and we've seen examples of this, policy and employment settings, which might preclude you as a support coordinator from questioning those particular support arrangements. So without that independence, it's very difficult for participants to be empowered to exercise their voice around the choices that they might want.
Why hasn't this already happened, do you think?
That is a wonderful question. There's been a number of reviews, from the Tune review to JSE inquiries to I think about 8 or 9 over the last number of years that have all recommended increased conflict of interest provisions and service independence. And that was what prompted us as an organisation to take that line in the sand and put it into professional standards of practice ahead of more traditional regulatory structures.
Are there particular interest groups that are resisting this change?
We've had discussions with a number of organisations who deliver supports and services like this. One of our requirements to being a member of DIA is to accept our professional standards of practice. But in saying that, we have a process that allows a provider to accept them on a transitional basis. So they might not be in alignment with that particular clause, but are able to demonstrate to DIA that they have an action plan in place that can be monitored to implement such independence of service at the participant level. And we've successfully gone through 12 of those arrangements so far with providers who have recognised the challenges in trying to manage conflict of interest and have undertaken our structure instead.
Yes, thank you.
What's the transition time on those 12?
They have been varied, the shortest being 18 weeks, the longest being just over 12 months. We tend to find that during the transition period, most participants take plan reassessment or plan review windows as a natural juncture to be able to find alternative support arrangements. For some organisations, that has meant retaining the participant as a support coordination participant and having that support coordinator find alternative services for the other services they were delivering, or vice versa.
Coming back to what you were saying earlier about the capacity of support coordinators to assist and enable the participant to question and seek information or seek a service in a different way, can you speak to the crossover in role there and where the appropriate boundary is between support coordination and advocacy?
It's an ongoing discussion and topic area. In our part of the sector, we talk about advocacy in the terms of little a advocacy or self-advocacy and supporting a participant to advocate on their own behalf. Where a participant might require more robust advocacy support. So that could be engaging through an AAT review. It could be going through other processes or systems that require the in-depth service that an advocate would undertake. A support coordinator would be expected to assist the participant to engage that advocate.
When you said it's an ongoing conversation, is there any resistance within the sector to support coordinators exercising that little a advocacy? Is it something that everybody accepts you do and should do, or is there a contribution?
It's very much a funding-based discussion and consideration. So support coordination, unlike most other services in the NDIS, is not a fixed service. You don't buy support coordination as a total package. Participants are funded based on a reasonable and necessary consideration, and the number of hours and then the types of service or choices from the menu of support that a support coordinator might be able to deliver are variable. So for some participants with large support coordination funding, we'll have a multitude of service functions to deliver to a participant and support a participant with, where others may only have, we see unfortunately too many examples of 10 or 12 hours of support coordination funding, which then limits the level of capacity building and little A advocacy work that they might be able to undertake.
Does that 10 to 12 hours correlate with a particular level of support coordination?
Not necessarily. We tend to see that more at levels 1 and level 2, less at level 3, but it's not specific to an individual level.
And that notion you were talking about then about the funding level impacting on the service that's provided steers us to another topic touched on in your statement, which is that of unfunded work. And in the 2022 Disability Intermediary Australia Sector Report, which, Commissioners, you have in your bundle A at tab 24, you say that, or the report says, 94% of support coordinators they supported participants beyond or outside the funding within their plan. Firstly, what are those 94% of people doing? Are they doing support coordination but just beyond the funding, or is it something additional to support coordination?
Just beyond the funding.
Is it this little a advocacy?
Not necessarily. It can be a range of different reasons for providers to deliver that in an unfunded capacity. Everything from moments of crisis that a participant might be going through. It could be meeting regulatory obligations, so reporting to the Quality and Safeguards Commission or to state-based regulatory structures. It could be supporting a participant through change of circumstances or an unscheduled plan reassessment or review. Practice supervision, particularly where there could be greater levels of complexity to a participant's support need that might not have been originally assessed or considered during planning process, and many others. It is really very variable across the sector for the reasons why a support coordinator would do that in an unfunded capacity.
And so I understand from that it's a combination of face-to-face work and non-direct or non-face-to-face work.
That's
Some
correct.
of it's been described in other evidence this week as the admin that goes along with the direct contact.
Absolutely. Unlike some of the other disability supports, when a participant is funded for support coordination, the NDIA will support a participant to connect with a support coordinator. That process is the request for service process. And in that request for service process, the agency indicates some reporting requirements that the support coordinator may have to report back to the agency, to the NDIA, on how the participant is implementing their plan. Typically, there's 3 reporting periods that a support coordinator will be required to do. One is a plan implementation report, which is typically 8 weeks after the participants connected with the support coordinator. A mid-plan report, which is variable based on the length of the plan. And then a plan review or plan reassessment report, which is typically due 8 weeks before a participant will go through a plan reassessment. And in those reports is a whole range of information as to how the participant has gone with their plan and what considerations the agency might wish to take at the upcoming plan review.
And the preparation of those reports is included in this 10 to 12 hours?
Absolutely.
Moving on to the last collection of topics that I'd like to raise with you this afternoon, it's the topic of registration.
Yes.
You say in your statement that about half of the support coordinator members are registered with the NDIS. You've given us some figures of how much it costs to go through that registration, an estimate of between $8,000 to $15,000.
That's correct.
What do your members see as the benefit or value of registration?
The value proposition for registration is incredibly stressful at this particular juncture. Support coordination providers have had their pricing frozen for the last 3 years, which makes it very difficult from an overheads perspective to be able to go through those registration costs and processes. But from a benefit perspective, our members who go through registration report to us that there are particular areas in which audit processes focus on, and Laurie Lee gave some evidence earlier around some of those areas, in particular risk management frameworks and employment relationship structures, as well as a series of other reporting requirements that the Commission might have. And going through that audit process, those policies and procedures are stress tested, which provides some assurance to those providers that what they have in place is robust enough to be able to meet those audit requirements. In saying that, the NDIS Commission regulates the market regardless of registration, and a number of our members have previously been registered and chosen not to re-register or continue with their registration for financial reasons, in order to be able to remain viable and to continue to deliver services.
You have members in Victoria?
That's correct.
Are you aware of, firstly, has Disability Intermediaries Australia given any guidance to your Victorian members on the Victorian scheme?
Yes, we have.
And are you aware of any providers who are actively encouraging their workers to register?
We're aware of a handful of providers that are actively encouraging their workers to register through that scheme. At this stage, I believe it's about 8. For particularly our plan management members, that process is a little bit more difficult because of the way they operate nationally, and that can create some duplication and difficulties. But within the support coordination space, we are aware of a few providers that are interested in that.
And so you said a handful and 8. How many members do you have in Victoria? What proportion is that?
From a percentage perspective, it would be less than 1%.
And does Disability Intermediaries Australia have a view on the whether it would be appropriate or not to introduce a national registration scheme affecting support coordinators and plan managers?
Well, plan managers are already required, so that would, in our view, continue to be appropriate. For support coordination, DIA takes the view that a national mandatory worker screening process is the more appropriate way than what the current provider registration process is. If the current provider registration process was to be reviewed, then we'll be able to make comments on whether that would be appropriate moving forward.
Are you able to say briefly why the worker screening would be the appropriate process from your point of view?
In not too dissimilar a context to disability support workers, support coordinators hold a long-standing and well-trusted relationship with the participants and the people with disability that they work with. So having a worker screening process to review the workforce within that service provision is completely reasonable, and none of our members have particular concerns about going through that. Echoing some of the comments made earlier, though, a national scheme rather than a state-by-state piecemeal approach is something that we would strongly encourage.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harper. Those are my questions, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'll ask first Commissioner McEwen, do you have any questions?
One question, maybe two questions. Mr. Harper, thank you. You say that you've got 900, over 900 provider members. What percentage is that of all the support coordinating providers in Australia?
So there's currently somewhere in the vicinity of about 4,500 providers of support coordination. However, when we look at the volumes of participants that they serve, we approximate that it's about 70% of participants that have funding with support coordination are serviced by our members.
And my final question it kind of relates to what the Chair asked earlier about whether there's been resistance. So why don't many other providers become members of your organisation? Do you know why?
We're rapidly and continuing to grow from a membership perspective. When I started back in 2019, we had approximately 60 members, and we're now at 900. So we're continuing to dive into the market and support the sector. But there's a range of reasons why providers might seek not to, including not willing to accept our professional standards of practice. So where those providers are conflicted, as we discussed earlier.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bennett?
No, thank you.
Thank you very much for coming to the Commission to give evidence today, and thank you also for the detailed statement that you've provided. We're grateful for your assistance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, I tender the statement of Jess Harper dated the 6th of February 2023 and ask that it be given the marking of exhibit number 32-6 and together with its annexures which you have in your bundle from tabs 22 to 29, I ask they be given the exhibit numbers 32-6.1 to 32-6.8.
I think you mean 32-6.1 to 0.8.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Those documents will be admitted into evidence. The markings indicated by Ms. Dowsett. Thank you.